Hi guys, so today what we're going to be doing is discussing the weighted average cost of capital, and this is in relation to equity and debt. So let's get into this. So let's start off with the basics. What is the cost of capital? So the cost of capital refers to the cost it's going to be to borrow equity or debt. Now, where this weighted average comes into play is when we need to combine both debt and equity. So essentially what we're doing is we're finding the average cost of debt and equity. But what we've got to include in debt is the fact that it is tax deductible. Equity obviously isn't tax deductible, but debt is, and this can be shown on the income statement because we've got profit before interest and tax. And the interest that we use from the debt that we get from the debt is tax deductible, and I'll show you how this is done. So what we've got to remember first is that the weighted average cost of capital is also equal to the return on assets. And so what do I mean by this? I'll show you. So what we'll have is I'll do a fairly basic balance sheet. Assets, we'll have liabilities plus equity. And I'll draw a dividing line there and there. So essentially, let's say we're borrowing 500 million in the form of debt. This is from the bank, could be notes payable. And then we've got 500 million in equity. This could be from pension funds, average consumers. And essentially what that means is we've got a £1 billion, and obviously that's an asset. So we can put in here 1 billion, and this would be in the form of cash in bank. So essentially what we've got, that's why the weighted average cost of capital equals the return on assets. So what is the formula for the weighted average cost of capital? So we can depict this really easily. So the weighted average cost of capital, since we are trying to find the average between debt and equity, what we're going to have, we'll start off, it's essentially like finding an average, so we're just going to add debt plus equity on the bottom. And on the top, we're going to do this for the debt. And so now we've got, this is essentially giving us the proportion of debt compared to equity. And now what we need to do is we obviously need to times by our cost of capital for debt. And this will be fairly easy. This will be our interest rate. However, we'll go into the tax deductible part later. Plus, once again, we need to find the proportion of equity. And once again, we just times this by the cost of capital for equity. And what we can do, this is actually referred to as, I don't know if any of you have recognised this, but this is the gearing ratio. So if you are giving the gearing ratio, this is what you would use. So that is the gearing ratio. So essentially, that is how you calculate the weighted average cost of capital. But obviously we're going a step further. So once again, I'll write this weighted average cost of capital. We've got the debt plus equity, finding the proportion. However, now what we're doing is we're going to deduct the tax. So let's say the tax rate, let's call it TC, corporation tax. In the UK, it's normally 20%. So let's just say 0.2. So essentially what we're doing is by having interest, we are indirectly reducing our taxation, and I'll show you why. So 1 minus the corporation tax times cost of capital debt plus, once again, equity, debt plus equity times the rate of equity. So now I'll show you why we use this. So let's have a little example. Let's say that we have debt worth, let's say 12,000. Let's say we have equity of 20,000. The cost of debt, so the cost of capital for debt, let's call that RD, is, let's go with 15.5%. These are just random numbers plucked out of nowhere. RE, let's go 21.2%. So now what we will do is we'll sub this in to the formula. So I'll use a different colour, probably use a green. Let's put it into this formula. So debt, 12,000 over equity plus debt. So obviously 12,000 plus 20,000 is 32,000. Now, times by 1 minus the corporation tax. Let's say corporation tax, once again, 20%. Now, what we do here is we put 0.2. We put 0.2 here because essentially our interest rate is going to deduct the full amount of tax. So imagine this 1 as the full amount of tax. And what's happening is we're paying 20% corporation. We're paying 20% corporation tax. So essentially we're only paying 0.8 of our corporation tax once we have deducted our tax, our interest. So then we'll times this by the 15.5%. Remember, this is percent. Ideally, I should have put, I'll show you now. Ideally, what I should have put is 0.155. So that is for, put this in brackets, that is for debt. Plus, use a different colour for this, we'll use a yellow. So equity, we have 20,000. Once again, 32,000. And this is our gearing ratio. And this is a lot more simple because equity is not tax deductible. 0.212. And if I were to calculate that, what it will end up with is, well, essentially we can kind of estimate. So if we've got 21.2% just here, and we've got 0.155, so 15.5%, and we're actually going to have a lower value than 15.5% because we have the interest being tax deductible. So essentially that's probably going to be around, random guess, 0.12. And obviously this is going to remain the same. But remember, these are still going to be weighted. So we're looking in the ballpark between these two values and taking a random guess, let's say 16%. So if we do the math, what it comes out to is 17.028%. And that is our weighted average cost of capital, meaning that the average cost of capital, if we were to finance a project through debt and equity, we are expected to return back 17.028%. So on this 32,000, if I were to use my calculator, we are expected to pay, so this would be 32,000 times 0.17028, 0.17028, we'll be expected to pay back 5,448. So that's the expected payback. So essentially what we need to make sure is that our project is more than 32,000 plus this 5,448, which is 7,448. We have to make sure that our project returns more than this. So that is essentially the weighted average cost of capital. I hope that's made sense, and stick around for my next video, which is going to be how the cost of capital of equity, but we use slightly different formula. We have to use an expected future value. So thank you for listening, and definitely check out my next video.